For almost 20 years, my life wasn't really mine. Everything from what I believed, even my sense of purpose, was decided for me. And I thought that escaping the cult would set me free, but I was wrong. Because those same cult-like tactics, well, they're everywhere, even in the workplace. So if you've ever felt trapped in a job where even speaking up feels risky, and where your identity gets stripped away, or where obedience is rewarded over originality, well, you're not imagining it. So by the end of this video, you're gonna know 5 warning signs that might be controlling you at work, and most importantly, how to break free. But before we get to our 5 warning signs, you see, we have to answer a very important question. What exactly is a cult? So let's take a look at Dr. Stephen Hassan's definition. Dr. Stephen Hassan is a leading cult expert, and he defines a destructive cult as it is typically authoritarian, headed by a person or group of people with near complete control of followers. Cult influence is designed to disrupt a person's authentic identity and replace it with a new identity. Okay, so I want to emphasize 2 things here. One is that a cult isn't just one charismatic leader, as many people think. A cult can actually be led by a group of authoritarian people. It can be a group of people who are enforcing the same beliefs, same purpose, same rules, same agenda, however you want to call it. So the real problem isn't who's in charge or how many is in charge. The real problem is how much of your true identity, your authenticity, has been replaced by this new identity. How much have they stripped away? How much control do they have over you? In fact, how do they control you? Well, they use techniques, they use influence to make people obedient and dependent. And later, we're going to see how one dangerous tactic led to a very deadly tragedy. And so when I first joined the cult, but actually a better term is when I was recruited, because again, people don't join cults, they are actually recruited into one. But in the very beginning, you know, there was a lot of love, there was a lot of validation. They make you feel special and you feel like you actually have something very special. But once I fully committed and I was joining the religion and I got baptized, after the commitment, you start to notice that there's actually a tone that shifts, because you realize that that love actually came with a lot of expectations. The love actually came with a lot of conditions, because if you didn't conform or obey by their standards, well, then that love or that warmth will actually disappear pretty fast. And the same thing happens in work environments. We see that love bombing sometimes starts in the recruitment stage, where new employees are given bonuses, they're given constant praise, especially if they want you part of their tribe, if you fit in their culture, in their workplace culture. But then you start to realize that once you're fully committed, that affection has a condition. It's only if you have total loyalty to the company that you will continue getting that praise and recognition. So after escaping the cult, I was actually still at my 9-to-5 job at this time. And there was still a lot of shame and embarrassment around accepting what happened. But one day I had the courage to be vulnerable to a trusted colleague and to share that delicate part of my life. Hesitantly, I said, you know, I used to be part of a cult. Of course, it didn't go like that, but I shared that I used to be part of a cult. And they looked at me, and there was a huge, long pause. And in my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, like I just had this fear of being criticized, this fear of being judged and being rejected again. And then they said, wow, Aubrey, wow. You know, I would have never thought that you were part of a cult. I had never thought that you were part of a cult. Because you seem further along than most people I know. And that moment shocked me, because how can someone be further along when their mind was in mental imprisonment for such a long time? How can that be? And the reason why I'm telling you this story is because this was a moment in my healing journey that was actually an awakening for me. It was shocking, and it was an awakening because I realized that indoctrination isn't just in religion or religious cults. indoctrination is universal. And this made me realize that so many people are living inauthentically and not living a fulfilled life. And the danger with indoctrination is that we get so comfortable with it that we don't question it. We start to shut off our critical thinking. How does indoctrination show up in the workplace? Sometimes it shows up when we just accept company values without even questioning them, because that's how it's always been. This is just how it is. When we don't use our critical thinking, we start to lose our ability to make our own decisions. And when this happens, there's another thing that starts to creep in, another layer, because you're no longer just believing what the group believes. Now you're changing who you are to avoid standing out. And this is where conformity takes hold. It's like, how much more can I change about me so that I am accepted? And how do we know? How do we know that conformity is actually taking place at work? Well, 67% of employees report feeling pressured to conform to corporate culture. That's 67%. Feel pressured to conform to corporate culture, even when it conflicts with their values. So let's look at what this looks like in real life. How conformity and indoctrination can quietly sneak into the workplace. Well, one of the most well-known cases is actually what happened in Wells Fargo. Maybe you remember hearing about it, when employees were creating fake accounts under customers' names without their permission.
If you bank with Wells Fargo, take a close look at your account tonight.
The California Department of Justice is now launching a criminal investigation into Wells Fargo.
Claims of fraud by Wells Fargo are now going national.
At first glance, it seems unthinkable. How can so many employees go along with something so unethical? Well, let's take a look at one former employee and what she had to say about what it was like working at Wells Fargo and doing these activities.
It was the norm to just open sales unethically. It was just what we were taught, and we just did it. It was just the stress of losing your job every day. I mean, the company, it was very sales driven, and they didn't care how they got it, at what cost.
So they were indoctrinated. Their mind was trained to believe that this was normal, that creating fake accounts was a normal thing. I know it sounds bizarre, but when you do things repeatedly, it becomes a habit. It becomes part of our identity. But here's the thing, many of those employees weren't really bad people. They were working under a system that normalized unethical behavior. The pressure to meet aggressive sales goals was so intense, and the fear of losing their job was so real that over time, doing the wrong thing started to feel normal. You stop asking, is this right? And start asking, will this help me survive here? And that's the danger when we're constantly pressured to perform, praised for obedience, and punished for questioning the system, the standards. And that's how indoctrination works. That is how toxic cultures are built. Well, sometimes when we know that something is truly flawed or something is just not right, but we follow the pack anyway to avoid embarrassment, to avoid conflict, that's when potential tragedies can happen, sometimes leading to very serious consequences.
It was a bitter cold but sparkling clear morning at Cape Canaveral. Here, the last seconds of the countdown.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
1 minute into flight.
1 minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical.
So in 1986, there was a Challenger space shuttle disaster. The night before the launch, some NASA engineers noticed a very serious problem with the shuttle's design in cold weather. They warned leadership that the shuttle wasn't safe to launch, but leadership was under huge pressure to stay on schedule. So they ignored the warning. Just 73 seconds after takeoff, the shuttle exploded, killing everyone on board. Why? Because no one wanted to delay the mission. People saw the problem, they knew the problem, but they stayed silent. And that's the danger when people prioritize fitting in over speaking up. So what exactly is this red flag called? It's called groupthink. It's when everyone goes along with something, even when they know it's wrong. But they go with the flow, they go with what the group thinks, just to avoid conflict, just to keep the peace. But as we know, this could lead to tragedy. But you know that uncomfortable feeling in your gut You know, the thing that tells you, hey, you know, something isn't right here, something feels off, even when everything looks fine on the surface. Just like I experienced in the religious cult, we were supposed to embody these values such as, you know, love, peace, and paradise. But on the outside, our actions were very different from those values. We were actually taught to shun people, to be separate from the world. Anyone who wasn't part of our community, we would label them as worldly people. So that separated us, and that gave us a very us versus them mentality. And this was one of those constant inner struggle that I had. Like, how can we preach about love and for people to be open to our message when we were judgmental, when we can easily just shun them? And that's what cognitive dissonance feels like. It's basically when your actions or those things on the outside are not matching the things on the inside. There is a misalignment. And this isn't just a religious thing. You know, we see this type of misalignment in values and actions all the time, even at work. For example, when a new employee joins a company with good intentions, all they want to do is just help people and do their job. Then later on, they're told to lie, or they're pressured to upsell something just to hit a quota. Or when a leader values empathy but is pressured to fire someone unjustly without good reason. And here's the thing, you see, when you start to realize that when you're under an exclusive or authoritarian type of leadership style, you realize that they really don't value authenticity. They don't value you. What they do value is your obedience and loyalty to them. And cognitive dissonance isn't just, you know, creating a decision that is not in alignment with your truth. You start to see that it starts to affect you mentally. You know, sometimes this tension shows up as anxiety, as burnout, as sleepless nights, as disengagement. And the longer you stay in this misalignment, right, where your actions are no longer in alignment with your true values, right, this misalignment, it really strips away your inner peace. So if you've ever felt mentally exhausted, disengaged, or emotionally checked out from a job, maybe it's not you. It might be the environment that's forcing you to act in a way that's not your truth. But that discomfort isn't always a bad thing, because to me, it could be a sign of awareness. And you can strengthen that awareness by asking yourself some critical thinking questions. Am I making choices based on me, based on my truth? Or am I making choices because this is what's expected of me? You see, when we start asking ourselves questions, that opens the door to self-education. We can start educating ourselves a little bit more. You see, I remember when I was in the cult, we were discouraged to look at external material, especially if the material was about them. We were also discouraged to pursue higher education because it was a doomsday cult. And you know, when I finally escaped the cult, I actually had a hard time reading those materials that we were banned from. Why? It's because they actually instilled fear in me. It was a mental and emotional thing. It was a mental programming thing that I had to learn how to deprogram. And I realized that it was really fear that was making choices for me, not courage. Fear kept limiting my mind. Fear kept limiting my options. But the more I did research, little by little, the more the fear started to fade away. It started to shrink. But breaking free isn't always about self-educating or taking in. Sometimes breaking free is also about self-compassion. You're going to need self-compassion because once you start to realize or confront those beliefs and habits that kept you stuck, right, in that toxic workplace or in that toxic relationship or community, some negative feelings might come up. But use this opportunity to give yourself permission to change the course that is more authentic to you instead of self-blame. Because once we decide that we have a choice, we take our power back. Let me repeat that. Once we decide that we have a choice, we take our power back. But you might still be thinking, you know, Aubrey, I'm in control. of my mind. I'm in the driver's seat. But are you? Well, in this next video, I go over 5 more words. And once you know these 10 words, they lose their power over you. So I'll see you there. Thank you. So always remember, my friends, to own your story, own your power, and live your truth.